My name is Sanju Ahuja and I'm a PhD student at the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, in India. This paper is titled Assistant or Master: Envisioning the User Autonomy Implications of Virtual Assistants. It is concerned with the ethical issues posed by virtual assistants. These are software agents that can perform services or tasks for the user with some degree of autonomy, such as providing information, making recommendations, controlling IoT devices, and making lists. It has been argued in literature that existing and emerging VA technologies may raise ethical implications from a user autonomy perspective. For example, a VA may persuade a user into sharing more information than they intend to and delegate control over private spaces such as the home. Designers need to be able to anticipate these ethical concerns in the early stages of the design process, and this has been termed as moral imagination. In literature, these concerns have been discussed for a wide variety of VA applications. However, even though these concerns are widespread, there is a lack of systematic frameworks which can aid designers to imagine these ethical concerns at the outset in the design process. To address this gap, we propose an autonomy centric ethics framework for the evaluation of VA technologies. To develop this framework, we looked into the conceptualization perspective on autonomy. Within literature, we observe that VAs indicate tensions with different aspects of autonomy. For example, there is a difference between psychological manipulation and restricting users' choices, even though they're both threats to autonomy. A recent paper in behavioral economics conducted a scoping review of nudge literature and found that this literature mainly discussed ethical issues concerning three conceptualizations of autonomy, which are agency, freedom of choice, and self constitution or authenticity. We also conducted a systematic review of dark patterns literature. This is currently unpublished, and we identified two additional conceptualizations in HCI contexts, which are independence and control. So, in this paper, we propose a framework consisting of these five conceptualizations of autonomy. Our argument is that if designers systematically consider each of these conceptualizations within the design process, they will be able to anticipate a broad range of potential ethical issues in design and in advance try to mitigate them as best possible. I now show how this framework can be applied to VAs both by situating existing ethical concerns that have already been discussed in literature and by identifying potentially emerging concerns. Agency, which is the first conceptualization, it refers to an individual's psychological capacity for decision making. It involves the ability to reason and reflect, which means that the threats to agency are deception and manipulation. For example, the cute design of robots and feminine personas of smart speakers can bypass conscious decision making at the site of private data collection. This is an agency concern. One can imagine that agency concerns are even more elevated for vulnerable users, such as children or older adults. Second concern is freedom, which refers to an availability of options or choices. It also means an absence of pressure tactics such as fear, pressure, guilt, or shame. Freedom restrictions are clearly evident on user access to private information. While data collection is a smooth and seamless part of the interaction process, data deletion is relatively very difficult. Freedom threats can also be imagined when VAs use pressure tactics for behavior change. For example, in a hospital, if a VA suggests medicines to a practitioner for administering to a patient, then it becomes really difficult for the practitioner to bypass that recommendation and use their own judgment because it creates a huge administrative liability for them. The third concern is control, which concerns cases where a user's consent is not taken for issues wherever consent was desirable. For example, a developer might listen to smart speaker recordings without user consent, or these recordings might be used to personalize VA recommendation, again without user consent. The fourth concern is independence. The meaning of independence is grounded in the notion of non reliance, which means that a user is free of any compulsions or dependencies. For example, if a user becomes dependent on information provision or recommendations by the VAs, it may undermine their ability to navigate through complex and potentially conflicting information. A VA may be designed with the persona of a friend or a partner, and it may foster obsessive forms of emotional intimacy. The fifth concern is authenticity, which means that an individual is acting for reasons which can be considered their own. Authenticity concerns, even in non VA contexts, have been discussed widely for personalized recommendations. But because a VA cannot produce several pages of content, their recommendations may become hyper personalized, which means being tailored to the individual. This means that even in the most trivial of things, users' thoughts, preferences, values, and opinions may come to be shaped by this hyper personalized content. So, this was our proposed framework. We believe that this framework can help designers increase the range and diversify the quality of the issues that they can identify. We recognize we recognize that VAs do not always undermine autonomy, and therefore this framework only acts as a guide. It leaves open the possibility that often the benefits of a VA might outweigh the concerns, or that even one sense of autonomy might outweigh another. These are the references used in this presentation. Thank you so much for watching.